Good morning. We continue our study and review and summary of the conclusion of Ayin Beis. And we are in volume 3, page 1461. If I recall correctly, we finished the end of the paragraph. Yeah, the end of the paragraph on bottom of 1461. So let's just refresh ourselves here where we're at. So overall, the Rebbe Rashab is discussing, as he began on page 1455, Shchera Nivanova. The neshama below is saying to the neshama above, I am darkened and concealed by the body and animal soul, which conceal the divine energy within me, but I am beautiful, because it is dafka below where the neshama reaches the highest levels, even higher, a thirst and a longing, a tzemoyin and a rotze. But tzemoyin is the expression of the Maimer here is several times. That's far deeper, to connect lishtaba begufa de malka and reaching to the highest levels in Atzmus, higher than the giluyim of the neshama. So in giluyim, in revelations, the neshama above is obviously on a higher level. That's why it's shcherani, because the neshama below is in a darkened state. But the darkness, the distance, is what catapults it and propels it to this highest level, as we've been discussing. So even though B'nai Yerushalayim, which is the level of Yerushalayim, with the neshama above, it reaches even higher than B'nai Yerushalayim, because that's the full statement. Shchera Nivanova B'nai Yerushalayim. That the neshama below is speaking to the daughters of Yerushalayim, and making that statement Vanova. And he went through this. This began basically on page 1455 in explaining back to the operative mashal example that is important to keep emphasizing, Riyas Ayin, that the neshama below is like the vision in the eye. Once it goes into the physical eye, it needs support from an outside light to see. So even though the eye sees, but it's darkened, not like the sun and even the moon or the luminous stone, where there they have light. The sun has completely light of its own, it's a moir. But even the moon, once it receives light, and it gives off light. The eye never gives off light, bisman hazeh, but it's a seeing eye, and it needs that outside light. While the etzem koyach hariyah is like the neshama is above, there it doesn't need any outside light, because it has light on of its own. But that will only be la'asr lave, as we will soon conclude where we're up to right now. So that's where the Rebbe Rashab went into the discussion that which part of the eye sees. It's paradoxically the darkest part of the eye, the pupil of the eye, is the shachar sheba'ayin. So the shcherani is what causes the ultimate vision, even higher than the vision of the neshamas above. And he went through this. This is all those pages. I'm not going to go through a whole summary here. We're speaking about the midbar, that shcherani b'midbar v'nova ani b'midbar. The midbar represents the desolate wilderness. In Klippa, that means no revelation of Elokus. In Kedusha is the profound tzemoyin and thirst for Elokus that desolation creates. That I'm reading now, page 1458, 1459. And then he goes on that the rich is dafka from the richuk, the distance, the hester, the concealment. And it's dafka the yesh below that has this level of appreciating Atzmus that's completely shalei ba'erech, and also reveals to us that Oir is also infinitely distant from Atzmus, even though Oir itself has something in common, because Oir is a revelation. But then the truth is that Oir also is infinitely distant. Going back now to page 1460, this deeper Ahava Rabba, then B'midbar Shari Isa. There he brings it back to the Riyah. And here he quotes the Likutei Torah B'midbar. This is the last paragraph we learned, where it says that all the Giluyim, all the Elam Eselyanim, all the higher worlds, and all the Giluyim are like a midbar v'shmamin. They're like a desolate wilderness. They're essentially compared, of course, to Atzmus, like a daimon, like lifeless. And the Rebbe Rashab, in a long parentheses on page 1460 and 1461, explained that by explaining that true life and true reality is only Atzmus, and everything else, definitely even not just the Kalim, not just the Guf, but also the Neshama and the Oiris, even the highest levels, though they channel this Atzmus the Kalite, but it's not from them. It's not Mitzad Atzmum. It's all being received from Atzmus. And then he went back to the language from the Alter Rebbe and Likutei Torah, that Dafka Atzmus is the root of all, is the source of all life. So when Neshama senses that, then it has that longing, that deep longing, to connect to it. I'm reading now, I'm looking at just summarizing the bottom of page 1461. And then he finally said, and that full revelation down below of Atzmus will be La'asid Lavi. The Asid Lavi will have the highest levels, higher than Mamal Kalam, higher than Seviv Kalam, Yem Ashlishi Atzmus, Nichya Lefonav. The Asid will be Riyas HaMahus, Mamish. That down below, the physical reality, Kishisala B'chinas Atzmus, B'chinas V'Nichya Lefonav, Yeh B'chinas Riyah Mamish. Which takes us back, of course, to the example of Riyah, of sight and vision. And that's where we stopped. End of paragraph at the bottom of 1461. So let's continue now. And the next paragraph is the last paragraph before we go back to the Maimer HaMakbil Shabbos that goes back all the way back to page 1350. So this is now 1461. So we're talking about 110 pages of all this explanation. Then he's going to go back to essentially the conclusion of Ayin Beis, at least what we have that the Rebbe Rashab left us. But before we get there, left us, meaning what he left in writing. But before we get that, there's the final tying up all the knots of this Riyah, comparing it today, the Asilavi we just discussed, and he's going to go back now to how it is today, where we don't have this full Riyah, but we have the thirst. So this is the next, the new paragraph, 2 pages, 2 lines from the bottom of page 1461. Pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And we'll continue learning inside now. Mashenkin Achshav. So what's the Mashenkin? By contrast, today, meaning not Lasid Lavi, before Mashiach comes, Hu B'chinas HaTzemoyin, and below they say, even though it says Liboy, below they say that it should be Lovei, which is correct, because that's how it is in Likutei Torah as well. He says, the truth is, when I learned it the first time, I thought first Hatzemoyin Levad, only thirst. We don't actually have the revelation. But in Likutei Torah, it clearly says Lovei. Lovei lebchinas madrega zu. So today we have the Tzemoyin. I shouldn't say only, because it doesn't say Levad. We have the thirst to arrive to this level, lebchina madrega zu, shu b'chinas riyah chushis. So when you don't have thirst, whatever revelation you have, you have. You don't necessarily thirst the highest levels, because the neshama above does have ava, yira, love and reverence, and it does have appreciation of Elokus. Like we learned, B'nai Yerushalayim, it has yira shalom, has complete reverence and awe. Where do you reach the thirst for Atzmus itself, for this Riyah Chushis, that we should have a complete experience of Atzmus? There's dafka below when you have this thirst. So the difference between now and Lasid Lavi, the thirst will be quenched. In other words, we will actually experience it. Now we have the thirst because of the distance. Shobkin Riyah Chushis. Riyah Chushis means actual tangible vision. Meaning, just like we see today, the physical reality, we call it Riyah Chushis. It's not just conceptual. We'll have that type of Riyah Chushis in Elokus. My spirit, my soul thirsts to God. L'kel chai, mosei ovei ve'era. To kel chai, to the living God. What is it thirsting? Mosei ovei ve'era. When will I arrive and see you? Earlier the expression was Tzam l'chanafshi, kam l'chapsari, be'eres siya ve'oyif, b'li moyim. But here he wants to specifically quote the word ove ve'ere, the word ve'ere, and when will I see you? So who can have such a thirst to see Atzmus? Only someone that feels deprived. In this case, the neshama below, that's in a state of darkness and distance, and through contemplating on its distance, by contemplating how Elokus is concealed, this in turn triggers and propels it to this level of tzemoyin. And through this thirst, next page 1462, that in turn draws this level of riyah. Now, does he mean it draws it today? It means to some extent, once you're thirsting for something, it's true, it's not been quenched yet, but you're beginning to get there because you're thirsting for it. So the more we contemplate due to our distance, it's like, let's say, when you're in the presence of someone or the person you love is in your presence. So you love them and you probably express the love, but if you don't see them for a while and they travel, there's a certain love that builds up because you really want to see them. So when you do, so with that thirst, in a way, is not there when they're in your presence. Not that there's no love, but that intensity is not there. So the fact is, the distance, again, paradoxically, is what builds up a tremendous thirst to actually see, and that will actually cause that you should ultimately see. Now, when will we see it completely? Of course, lost loving, not today. But all that work and thirst and semoyin and rotzeh, all is part of that process. So if we never had the distance, we would have the giluyim of Elokus, but we would never have the etzem of Elokus. So that's where the tzemoyin comes into play. Now, you remember, this was a key point, because it wasn't just shcheda and ivanova. Even though I'm dark, I'm still beautiful because I still have a connection to godliness. We learn furthermore, it's because of the darkness that I'm actually even more beautiful than you are. If you remember, when he went over, when he started speaking about this, so first the pshat was that even though I'm in a desert and I'm in a dark place, I'm still beautiful. Keep that in mind. But then on page 1459, he went further, that the very darkness actually propels the neshama to even deeper beauty because of this, because of the thirst and the distance. Yeah. So, on top of 1462, quoting the Siddur is usually, well, it's always actually, is the Mittler Rebbe Siddur that he compiled all the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim as he wrote them on commentary on different parts of davening, called Siddur Imdach, or sometimes just Siddur. Sharash Chedesh he's referring to, Ubelekut Teira, and another Lekut Teira, B'dibra Masul V'hoya Mida Chedesh B'chadashe. So he's referring us to there. What does he discuss there? Be'inyan Shemesh B'Shabbos Zdokel Aniyim. So in the Gemara's so-called poetic way, it says Shemesh B'Shabbos. It's Zdokel Aniyim. When the sun is shining on Shabbos, it's a charity for the Aniyim because it's bright. As he explains there, it's because, I'm trying to remember why. Shemesh. Well, simply put, is when the sun is shining, generally speaking, that's a revelation. Also, when a person is not well, we know the sun is a healing agent. So I have to look it up in the Gemara exactly what he says, but bottom line, he says, the Ksiv, he brings a proof. V'zorcha lachem yirei shmi shemesh tzedakah u'merapeh become fair. So the pasuk is saying, and again he's bringing the pasuk.
Umarpe b'chnofeho.
Umarpe, I said marpe. So it says v'zorcha lachem. Zorcha means it should shine on them. Yirei shmi, those that are revere my name. Shemesh tzedakah. So what's the expression of Shemesh Tzedakah? That's what the Gemara says. Shemesh b'Shabbos is Tzedakah la'aniyim, u'marpe b'kamfer, and it heals with its wings. So he explains, the Knesset Yisrael b'yamei sachayil, Knesset Yisrael, which we understand means the body of the community of Israel, refers to all the Neshamas Yisrael. That's the expression, Knesset Yisrael, Malchus, Knesset is like the Knessia, is like a gathering. So it refers to all neshamas being meisachel in the weekdays. Hein b'bchinas chelas ava. They're in a state of love sickness. Chelas ava is an expression in the Shir HaShirim, like he says, "K'meshkosu samchuni ba'shishus kechelas ava ani." So support me. Ashishus, we learned earlier, can mean a few things. It can mean, I think he said, wine, or also support me, because chelas ava means when a person is like lovesick, when they don't see the person they love, they actually can get sick from it. So again, the distance creates a certain deep longing and yearning, which he calls chelas ava. So that's in the weekdays. Shezeu min haizbonus. This chelas ava, why is he becoming lovesick? Because he's contemplating eich shayesh hu hepech ha'ayin. How the yesh of this world, the yesh, the ego, the identity of the neshama down below, in a body and animal soul, is the opposite of ayin. Ayin is bittul, where you're completely absorbed into the reality of godliness. The yesh is hepech ha'ayin. The kol yesh behechlich shisavusei ma'ayin she'ena b'chinas mitzias. So he's reviewing again what this contemplation consists of. Every yesh, you have to say it's creation. Where did it come from? It didn't create itself, and it wasn't created by another yesh, which is similar to it. It had to come from a reality that's a completely different reality. That's why we call it yesh ma'ayin. It doesn't mean something from nothing. It means something from a different mitzias altogether. She'ena b'chinas mitzias, from a reality that's not a defined identity like the yeshes. Yesh miyesh, classic example is yesh miyesh, is anything that you take one object and you reshape it. You reshape a piece of gold into an ornament. You take a pitcher of water and you pour a cup. So it's yesh miyesh. But yesh ma'ayin is coming from a state of non-mitzias, meaning non-mitzias compared to the mitzias of the yesh. So when a person contemplates on that, and in truth, what's the reality of the true yesh? What's really giving it substance and reality? It's the ayin that we don't see, that's invisible, because that's what brings it to existence, as we learned earlier. And the yesh does not feel it or sense it at all. Adrabah, on the contrary, who b'chinas teikif hayeshes v'ametzias. The yesh is not just it doesn't feel the ayin, it's the exact opposite. It feels itself. The self-contained sense where we just completely self-absorbed, and it actually conceals on the divine energy within it. So when a person contemplates on that and realizes the truth, so what does that do? So it says, so this contemplation, sensing the distance, sensing how far the yesh is to the point we don't feel Elokus, that in turn causes a deep thirst. What he calls here a chayfetz, a desire and a longing, ma'id, that there should be the gili of the ayin and the yesh. Now I really said this earlier, somewhat different language, but the Rebbe Rashab clearly wants to elaborate more, just to drive that point home. Now, obviously, this is only when there's izbonus. If a person doesn't have izbonus, if you're not saying Shema Yisrael, you don't contemplate on it, then the yesh is just where it is. That's where most people on this earth just sense themselves, and they're not necessarily longing anything. But when you do contemplate, you begin to long. Now, the truth is, everybody longs for something, but I don't want to go into that right now. The point is that it's the distance and the concealment, that the shreirani, that actually causes this thirst. That's one hisbonus. The chain. Let me stop here for a moment before we continue. Anybody have any questions?
I know you said that you don't want to go there, but the Bekitzer, the reason why the neshama longs for, everybody longs for something, is that because the neshama is coming from above and it doesn't feel comfortable in the goof, so it's seeking to return And so it's seeking something transcendent and sublime. And of course, in essence, it's seeking its source. But those who don't understand that may seek something beyond them that's transcendent, like music or literature or nature or something like that. But Kitzur, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
But here he's discussing it in the context of what his bonus, because his bonus is actually in godliness, and you realize that is the ayin eliki that we're looking to connect with. Another his bonus, which I believe he also referred to earlier. I'm just going back a moment. I have to see. I think he spoke about this too. The chain, addition, and so too, mizbonus, another contemplation. This was a bonus of recognizing nothing creates itself. You look at the world around us, and you come to realize there's some force, and that force is its true reality, which is the Ayin Eliki. But then there's a bonus in the Koyecha Ein Sof Shabisavos, in the power of the infinite in creation. In other words, of God's creative power. Ubanhoga hatmidis. So two things he's saying here briefly. The Koyecha Ein Sof Shabis, in order to create, you have to have a tremendous power to be able to create Yesh Ma'ayin. And the best proof is none of us can create Yesh Ma'ayin. Everything we create is from something else. With all our innovations and scientific development and the breakthroughs and so on, at the end of the day, it's Yesh Miyesh. It could be fascinating, it could be breathtaking, but it's still not Yesh Ma'ayin. So there's a Koyach Ein Sof in Hisavos. Then there's another thing, the Anhoga Tmidis, which we referred to earlier, is the fact that God consists, the persistence of existence, that the sun rises exactly every moment, exactly precisely every morning, and the moon and all the celestial bodies, and for that matter, all of nature. Look at nature. It's just a tremendous wonder, the Anhoga Tmidis, which is also his bonus, discussed more in other Maimorim that talk about the consistency. You know, when you see something and you look and you literally the predictability, the determinism of existence, that itself is quite a wonder. So all that leads to all this is bonus leads to appreciation of some higher force that's like a conductor that's keeping all this in motion. On all that, so even though it's concealed ostensibly, but the contemplation comes to appreciate these forces in life, the divine forces in existence, the Koyach Ein Sof and the Anhoga Tmidis, which are two different things, because one is the creation of it, and one is this maintaining it or perpetuating it. Shekol Zeh, Kol Zeh is referring to all this is bonus, which here is pretty brief, but we have discussed it more at length earlier, especially when we spoke Kol HaMayrich Be'echad. You may recall it was pretty relatively at length where he elaborated on what are we contemplating on. Shekol Zeh Hu B'chinas Hasoga Gemura. The Rebbe Rashab, by saying these few lines, he's saying Kol Zeh, he's like summing it up, but he's referring to all this contemplation. It's Hasoga Gemura. It's not faith. It's not pure blind faith. When I say blind, I don't mean in a negative way. I mean to say it's not just faith. It's based on observation and based on a logical processing, a logical process where you come to realize from the yesh that there's an ayin, and from creation that there's a creative power. Just like you look at a piece of art, you realize there's a great artist behind it, and it's the more beautiful the art, the greater the artist, even though you may not see the artist. And the same thing with the consistency. What he said here, the perpetuation, the Anhoga Tmidis. Kol Zeh B'chinas Hasoga Gemura Ki'ilu Roya Mamish. So here, I was wondering before what Rashab meant, preparing us to see when Mashiach comes, for sure the case. But he's going further. He's saying that when you contemplate, it's as if you actually see it. Now, what does that mean? So I think I explained it in previous classes, but I'll just sum it up. When a scientist, I'm just using a scientist or any expert, looks at the same thing that a novice looks at, they will see something we don't see. Now, no one sees subatomic particles with their physical eye, but there comes a point when you become so familiar with the forces beneath the surface that it becomes obvious to you. Just like, good doctors, an excellent expert doctor sees a symptom, immediately he sees the cause. Ke'ilu roya mamish. It doesn't mean he sees it with a physical eye, but it's the reality of it, the resonating truth of it is just like you would see the symptom, he sees the cause. Like we say, Ezu chacham haroya sanelad. Who's the wise one? He sees the consequences of something. And what does that mean? He sees the future? We're not talking about a crystal ball. We're not talking about prophecy. Chacham, adaf menavi. We're not talking about prophecy. We're talking about the wisdom. Or you show someone numbers, and the experienced eye can see a pattern. And the same thing with any type of expertise. Whatever area it is, science, medicine, law, a person who will look at a page, let's say in Ayin Beis, and knows Ayin Beis well, is going to see something much more than a person who reads it for the first time. So that's what he's saying here, that the contemplation, and obviously the more the contemplation, the more the Ke'ilu Roya Mamish. But he does say Ke'ilu, so let's keep that in mind. Ke'ilu Roya Mamish, U'Kulmoishin is Bar Le'il, as was explained earlier, Dibra Maschel Leman Das. So he's taking us back all the way to volume 2, page 684. Probably worthwhile looking there. Well, not probably, for sure. The Rebbe Rashab is citing it. But I recall that he does discuss more at length when he speaks, especially in the context of the difference between Shmiya and Riya, hearing about it or seeing it. So bottom line is that we come to a point, Kila Reya Mamish. Now, I just want to emphasize, I wrote it up in the chapters of the essay I'm still in the middle of about the conclusion of Ayin Beis. Remember, Shema Yisrael is Shema Yisrael. In Torah, the Maimer HaMakbil L'Sheves, he emphasized, because that's a neshama on its own through tefillah, Shema. But Torah is Riyah. Remember HaMakbil L'Sheves, HaMashpili Liros. So I think when I wrote the essay, I cited this page, as among other pages, because the goal is ultimately to go from Shmiya to Riyah. So the neshama on its own, like the eye below, needs an outside light to see. It doesn't see on its own without that outside light. But once the eyes are illuminated and it could see, remember we learned the neshama then elevates to a point that it itself will see. We say, called basar will see. And ayin ba'ayin yirah, the verses he brought to the bottom of last page as well. So all this is not just an aside, it's critical to the full understanding of the experience. In other words, hearing about Elokus is a level of contemplation, a level of that brings you to Riyah, Ke'ilu Raya Mamish. And that's how it's going to all come together in a few lines where it goes back to the mashal of Riyah, of Ayin, Riyah Sa'ayin. But this is going to be the last time that the Rebbe Rashab is going to refer to Riyah, I believe, because remember, the end of Ayin Beis, he never comes back to this. That's one of the reasons we're learning this, and one of the reasons I'm writing the essay is to tie it all together. That's why I'm emphasizing it. So, Ki'ilu Roya Mamish, through the contemplation, and if you remember the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer HaMakbil L'Sheves, I recall as well, elaborates also how we go from Shmiya to Riyah. It begins with Shmiya. First you hear about it, meaning you don't yet fully experience it as if you see it. And that leads you ultimately to Riyah, which is through Torah that helps us see it. But here, when you say contemplation, he doesn't say through Torah. So it's interesting. It means that through the Izbonus itself, it would seem, unless he's alluding to it, but I don't see him say, he doesn't say that you can't reach it without, that you must have Torah here. But the big picture, Torah really does, Torah is the main illuminator. Einei ha'eda, the Malachim, they all are the support system, the siyua. So he doesn't say it, but ultimately the neshama itself will see. So I'm not going to say now that the abundance itself of the neshama leads us there, but it's definitely part of the process. Just pointing out this diuk. Let's see, he's going to still talk about it, so we're not finished yet, the subject matter. So, let's see here. Okay. Now, interesting, the next line, this looks like he's talking, is ill. In that mimer, he discusses it a certain way. He says, Ulefi, Hamavor Khan. Because there, I recall correctly, in that mimer, it doesn't talk about the Tzemoyin. There he talks in general, the contemplation that leads one to as if they're seeing the ayin, and they see the koyach eliki, the koyach Ein Sof, the koyach hanhoget, the koyach Elokus of hanhoget midis. Lefia mavur kan, here the subject, who megedel had semoyin the soma nafshi. What's causing a person to come to this level of perceiving Elokus is coming through tsemoyin, from the great thirst. Soma nafshi, like he said, Mosai ove ve'era, Mosai ove ve'era, pnei elikim, b'chinas ha'atzmus the Ein Sof, the hu chayecha amiti. So clearly, he's clearly telling us that there's different ways you come to this perception or riyah, or ki'ilu riyah mamish, either through contemplation period, or the thirst, in this case, adds a whole other dimension, because the thirst, that intensity we talked about, is that when will I be able to arrive and see the face of God, which is referring to Atzmus Ein Sof, the hu chayecha amiti. Like we learned earlier, that in the parentheses he explained, that's our true source of life. Even the neshama who gives life to the body is also getting its life from Atzmus. So when a person, that thirst leads us to come to want to be connected and absorbed in chayecha miti, your true life, vayidei atzamoyin hazeh, hu shemesh b'Shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim. And it's through this thirst, going back to the opening, the line on top of the page, second line. He says, the shemesh b'Shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim, the b'Shabbos meir b'chinas shemesh havaya. So now he's tying it together. Before he said, Yemois HaChayil, he said there's a state of Chelas Ahava, that's where the Tsemoyin is dominant to the point of love sickness. Then, he says, this Tsemoyin, that will ultimately bring to Shabbos, when the sun shines. What is that referring to? Shemesh Hashem. Like we say, Shemesh Hamogin, Hashem Elikim, that the light of Hashem, the son of Hashem, Shemesh, of course, is not like the Levana. Shemesh is a source of light. Becomes a Shemesh Hashem that's shining la'aniyim. So probably the diuk here is aniyim refers to a state of thirst, a state of impoverishment. So, but because that causes the great thirst, that in turn leads to the revelation from Shemesh Hashem. Like it says, and Shabbos would be called pleasure. The b'Shabbos Shabbos meir b'chinas ha'eneg ha'atzmi the Atzmus Ein Sof. Shabbos is meir, radiates the core pleasure of Atzmus Ein Sof. U'kamoishin is boy le'il b'inyan gimel sud is the Shabbos she'em b'chinas ha'tainu. Like we learned earlier, this was specifically the end of volume 2 about the 3 meals on Shabbos. I'll explain this in a moment. Let me just read it inside. Which all the meals are tainug, and then comes the third meal, u'besuda ha'gimel. The third meal on Shabbos, hu gili b'chinas Pnimiyus Atik, we learned, is the level of the inner dimension of Atik. Okay, let me stop for a moment here and explain this a bit, because I see this section that we're learning now, the Rebbe Rashab is tying together a lot of themes from a lot earlier in Ayin Beis, but he's doing it very briefly. And if you don't remember what we learned then, it becomes hard to understand why is he bringing all this into the picture. So I want to just step back. And what it also tells me, the fact that he's doing this is because he's coming to conclude a section in Ayin Beis, and very often when he concludes a section, he brings together all kinds of ideas from earlier in Ayin Beis just to give us the coordinates. Like very often when I do the overview of the entire Ayin Beis, this is what I depend on a lot, is looking where the Rebbe Rashab sums it up himself. Sometimes he doesn't sum it up, but very often he does. And here's one place where he is doing that. So when he, in Ayin Beis, and I'm going to write about it as well in the essay more, you're going to find very often in Ayin Beis 3 levels. This goes all the way back from the beginning of Ayin Beis, 3 interpretations in Keser. Later, 3 interpretations in Spheris. Recently, we've been learning about Mamala Seva Vanatzmus, B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Meidecha. This isn't just random 3s. 3 is the ultimate number of interface. because one refers to from our perspective, on our terms. Second is God's terms. And the third is the joining of them together. Or in the words we've also learned, das tachten, das elyon, and the joining of both the tata, and the joining of both yichudim. This theme will be addressed later in Ayin Beis, literally as we come to the conclusion, last pages even. But overall, all of Ayin Beis, you see these three. In Chelik Beis, second volume, in the earlier edition, now there's a new edition, so it's more volumes, talks at length about the 3 meals of Shabbos. And a lot of people have asked me who've learned Ayin Beis, why is the Rebbe Rashab elaborating? But when you understand the central theme, it's perfect. Because Shabbos is an example of Shabbos every week, is ultimately La'asad Love, is Yom Shekule Shabbos U'Menucha L'chai Elamim. So there's the 3 levels, the 3 meals, the 3 tefillas, the evening meal, the lunch meal after Shachris and Musaf, and the afternoon Shalosh Shudas. And they represent 3 levels in Tainug Eliki, going from the bottom up, Mamala, Seviv, and Atzmus, or Pnimiyus Atik, to put it more precise. So the Rebbe Rashab bringing it here is not just, happens to be, he's just connecting it. It's very much part of the central theme of Ayin Beis, and it helps tremendously understand the different levels that we are reaching here. So the interesting thing is that the Neshamas Lamaila and the Elamis Alyenim, they experience Mamala Kalalman, for sure. They even experience Seviv Kalalman. But Atzmus, remember, Eina Reich Lecha, the Atzmus is Dafka Be'elam Haza. It's only the Yesh below, precisely because there's no revelations. And precisely because it feels that it's a self-contained entity that tells us about Atzmus. So, in the context of all our discussion here, Mamala Seviv and Atzmus, which he brought earlier as well, it makes sense why he's referring to all of this. So now when we talk about Shabbos, you compare it to Yemei Sachel. Here, in a way, Shabbos could be an example of La'asad Love. Yemei Sachel is more an example of today, where there's the Tzemai and the Chelas Ahava, but he's going to tie it all together in the next few lines. I just wanted to contextualize it a bit to understand that it's not just bringing all kinds of random ideas, but it's actually all very relevant to the central theme here. So let me see here. I'd like to read all the way till, I don't think we'll have the time. There's too much text to cover. But let me just stop somewhere. Let me see here. I'll go a little further. So he says, so as we learned earlier about the Gimel Sudas of Shabbos, Bechinas Tainug, and the third Sud is Pnimiyus Atik, which is this highest level that we're talking about, Atzmus Ein Sof. V'zeu Shemesh Tzedakah. The mitzvah Tzedakah hi b'chemish. Maybe I should stop here. Let me just see for a moment how far I have to go to explain this. Yeah, I think we should stop here, even though I did start late, but I think there's a lot of details here. Let me see if anyone has any questions. Let's start with that. If there are any questions up to what we learned here, we'll take the questions, and maybe I'll continue tomorrow from this line here. But let's stop. Any questions? No questions?
Well, I'll ask a subtle one. Why do you, well, yeah, I guess it's you saying it, liken Pnimiyus Atik to Atzmus? I recognize that they're like adjacent to each other, but they're not dafka exactly the same.
First of all, it's not me that does it. The Rebbe Rashab does it a number of times, quite a few times actually. And remember, everything is microcosm, macrocosm. Just like we speak about in Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiya, that the Sheresh HaNeshama is an Atzilus, and then he adds Sheresh Shoshei is an Atzmus Ein Sof Lifnei Atzimtzum, because everything is microcosm, macrocosm. So in so-called Seder Shtalshalus, compared to the worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Tzir, Asiya, Keser is higher than that, and in Keser itself, Pnimiyus Atik is the highest level. And if you recall, he said Pnimiyus Atik is there's a me'ain ke'ain Pnimiyus Atik in the before Ak, and he says that's rooted in Atzmus Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. So it's a matter of microcosm, macrocosm. It's not the level, because when you talk about true, when you talk about true Atzmus, as I've said many times, we don't really even talk about actual Atzmus. But comparatively speaking, Pnimiyus Atik is what he compared when he says the neshama is rooted in Pnimiyus Atik. If you remember, that Pnimiyus Atik he called the Darga Ha'achreina.
Yeah,
Of Ein
Tachton
Sof.
Shabbat
Yeah, Tzarteina Sheba Maitzil. He said the neshama comes from there. The Yochid, if you remember, the Nitzutz Echad Nivra, that's rooted in the Nitzutz cotton Boira. So
Yes. Yes.
So it's all microcosm, macrocosm, brief.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, unless you want, if you all want to stay on a little longer, I can go through the next
Baruch
section.
haba, Reb Simen.
Huh?
Baruch haba.
We should be saying it to you, Reb Shlomo. We missed you. Welcome.
I was in Nashville.
Well,
I'd love to learn some more. Sorry, go ahead, Rabbi Jacobs. I personally would love to.
Me too.
We're missing it for a long time. Mr. Schneider's giving a heart. I think sounds like George wants it.
Our soul assessed it. Please continue.
Okay. How could I say no to that? Okay. And now I remember the Gemara actually. When it's a cloudy day and the anim who don't have much food, so on Shabbos, it makes the Shabbos a much more difficult one because they can't go outside. It's either rainy or the weather is not good. When the sun is shining, so it's Tzedakah la'aniyim, not just for a point of view of refuah, but it's a bright day, so they can go be a guest somewhere, participate, and therefore it's a brighter day for the aniyim. If I recall, that's what the Gemara says. But obviously, a Pichsidis and deeper is much more going on.
Money.
Huh?
Okay, we're going about another one.
There's a much more going on. Yeah. Because obviously aniyim refers to a level of impoverishment from Elokus, like ein ani ela b'das. And Shabbos is referring to revelation, and revelation of Shemesh Hashem, Shemesh Havaya. So the Rebbe Rashab, while he's explaining all of this, is also using that Maimer Chazal, because again, so Yemois HaChel is like Chel Ahava, is the state of Chel of love sickness, because, as he said, because of the distance. But then the Hisbonenus that he talked about causes the thirst, and ultimately that thirst begins to experience something, like he said, because when you start thirsting for something, you start connecting to it. And to the point that the Tzamoyin brings Shamish b'Shabbos Tzedakah la'aniyim. So on Shabbos, they actually get this level. So on Shabbos, it reveals this level, especially the third meal, which he referred to Pnimiyus Atik. So now he's going to connect it to, what is it connected to Tzedakah? Why is it called Tzedakah? I mean, the simple meaning Tzedakah means it's a charity for the aniyim. It's a gift for them. But he's going to explain a little deeper. So he says like this. Let me just say, in the halacha that tzedakah is, it says a person is supposed to give meiser, asiris, which means 10% of their profit, of their income. But it says that there's what's the lashon? Hamavazbiz gives. I'm sorry, not hamavazbiz. What's the expression? It says like this: you give meiser, and even better is to give chemish, 20%. So he says, using that, what does chemish mean? What is chemish? Chemish means a fifth. So a fifth of 100 is 20%. A tenth is 10%. So he says like this: The mitzvah zeu shemesh b'tzedakah. The mitzvah tzedakah b'chemesh. He's referring to obviously the higher level of tzedakah, b'chemesh, a fifth. V'hu inyan v'achamishis lepare. So the pasuk in Parshas Miketz, I believe, when he talks about pare, so it says that 4 parts belong to the people, and the chamishis, a fifth part, went to pare, the king. So from that we learn that chemesh should go pare here. In the negative, this pare in the kedusha goes to tzedakah. Arba hayodis, 4 parts. Arba hayodis means the 4 arms, but in like 4 parts. Hem daled elmis abya. They refer to the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. Shein daled esi savaya. It corresponds to the 4 letters Yud, K, Vav, K. Atzilus is Yud, Bri is Hey, Yitzir is Vav, and Asiya is the last Hey. Vein daled yodas shebechol. These are the 4 arms. Shebechol echad trein drein. Each one has 2 arms. There's a right and a left arm. So there's 5 fingers. And each one has 2 b'chinas dichar v'nukva, male and female. I wrote here that this is taken from Zohar and Lekutei Torah. So again, the Rebbe Rashab is being very brief, but he's basically saying all hashpos come from the 4 arms. V'chamishis. So then what is the 5th? The pari, higili ein sof. That's referring to ein sof, which is higher than Atzilus, higher than the 4 levels. Stima dechol stimin, which means they're concealed from all concealments. Shalamayla b'chinas Atzilus, that's much far higher than Atzilus. B'chinas Atik, antu chad, that's the level of Atik, which is in Keser, higher than Atzilus. And that's the level antu chad. You are one, v'lei b'chushbon, not a measurable one. So it's not just oneness, it's exclusivity, a certain singularity. That is the 5th level. Which Zeir Breshis? I remember Zeir Breshis a few pages back. Oh no, there was a Zeir Breshis. 1 second. Where was it? I think in the previous page. Let me see. Yeah. 10 lines from the bottom of the page, 1461. Antu chad. Okay. And that's what tzedakah mamshech. Because since tzedakah is b'chemesh, by giving a 5th away, that 5th is mamshech ein sof. So the daled yodis is what belongs to the individual. But the chamishis is drawing down something higher than ishtalshus, higher than atzilus bri yitzir asiya, higher than yudke vovke. That is tzedakah. B'zeu gamkin in shemesh tzedakah, the shemesh b'shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim, gili b'chinas Pnimiyus Atik. And that's the shemesh tzedakah that's connected, even though it says shemesh havaya. So you have to say he's talking about higher than havaya here, yudke vovke, and that's the level of Pnimiyus Atik. And how do we reach there? This comes to the tzemoyin b'chinas chelas ava the sheishes yimei hachel, like he said on top of the page, through the thirst that creates a love sickness, meaning a yearning for the one you love, in this case God, in the 6 days of the week. Through that nimshach b'Shabbos, that in turn draws down on Shabbos gili b'chinas v'chamishi sanal, draws down this 5th level of Atik, or Pnimiyus Atik, the 5th level of Keser. Ukiyadua, It goes back to the third meal, the Suda Shlishis, the Shabbos, who me'ein de la'asid. The third meal of Shabbos is me'ein. It's like a taste of or a similar to the future. B'madrega ha'yesha el yena. In the highest level, u'kameshin is bar li'il ba'erech, as was explained at length earlier, which was in volume 2, but he also referred to it in volume 3. I have to find it. A few pages back, I recall. And that's how he connects all this together. As I said, this is more of summing up many different ideas that were discussed earlier. So even though it seems like it's coming out of nowhere, why is he bringing Tzedakah and why is he bringing Daled Yodes and Chamishis? That's why I summed it up, that ultimately is referring to reaching the third level, the highest level, where you have the joining of Elokus relates that is on our terms, Mamal Kalaman, or Das Tachne Yechud Tata, together with Elokus Sevav Kalaman, that's beyond us, connecting together comes from the third level that's higher than both, which in this case talk about Pnimiyus Atik, the third meal, Chamishis Lepare, and that's what Tzedakah reaches. When you give Tzedakah, so you're giving from yours to another, you're drawing down the Chamishis Lepare, the fifth level. Now, just for the record, Pare is in Zohar, refers to sometimes the highest level of Gili, the Minei Ispariu Kola Giluyim. The Rebbe brings it often. That Pare in Klippa, of course, is
Kol mehoirim. Kol mehoirim.
You're speaking to me? Anyway, so Pare refers to a very high level of Gili, like he says in
Paroi
Chamish.
b'minei isperiu kol mehoirim.
Oh, yeah. The Minei Ispiriu Kol, from him flow in a, like burst forth, actually. Spirit is like bursting forth, Kol Nehei, and all the energies, all the lights, all the Giluyim. Yeah. And here I will stop because the next section, he's going to tie this all back to Midbarcha, Uba Midbar Shari Isa, rather. The Midbar, that through the thirst we come to this level of Riyah. That Riyah, ultimate Riyah, happens dafka down here below. Not immediately, obviously. It takes time. But ultimately, the ultimate experience and perception of Atzmus, higher than all the levels, higher than all the Giluyim above, happens dafka in the Midbar. That's what he's going to now bring it back to as he concludes this section, the next half a page, which this I would stop here because it deserves its own discussion tomorrow, the next class. So we'll stop here, halfway down page 1462. Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, does that last part imply that if a person just gives 10% for tzedakah, that he's not drawing down this extremely high level? You need to give a chamishi?
I never saw that explicitly said. It's an interesting question. I would say you definitely draw down something because it is tzedakah, and the mitzvah is being fulfilled. Probably, I would say it's not the fullest hamshach, but there is definitely. But I would have to see if the Rebbe spoke about tzedakah very often, about a meiser, a chemesh. But even without what he's saying here, the fact is a person who gives more, you can imagine, is getting more schar and gets more hamshachah. But you could say that you get some hamshachah, but not maybe the full level. But what level? I don't know if it says anywhere. Does it say anywhere that meiser is mamshich so much, and chemesh so much? But you have to say there is a difference, obviously.
And what was the term here that it mamshich's atzmus? I don't have it in front of me. What was it if you gave a chomesh? What was the actual or ein sof lifnei tzimtzum atzmus?
No. He said the words like this. He said, Gili ein sof stimme dechol stimmen shalamayla maylam b'chinas atzilus atik antu chad. There's a bunch of names. Gili ein sof stimme dechol stimmen, much higher than atzilus, atik antu chad. 5 different descriptions of this level.
And the highest one is Atik, Pnimiyus Atik there?
No,
Atik,
they're all the same
Ahava?
level. He's just giving he describes it different ways. But
Uh-huh.
Pnimiyus Atik, yeah, that's all that level, that same level.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
What's the lashon in Chazal that a person should give meiser? That's the expression. A person shouldn't splurge more than chemish. But I'm trying to remember what's the lashon. You're supposed to give meiser. Then there's another lashon, like an even better chemish. But a person shouldn't give more than a chemish. Does anyone know the
And
lashon?
and then of course we have Tanya, which says a person will
Yeah,
give
that's
anything.
another story. That to save a yeah.
That's true. Basir's definition. I guess.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here. Let me end this recording and then we can.